Alright, so this is the BFS portion that covers the rods. That easily the most underrated part of the entire system, I feel. Most people say they get these super high-end reels and they're like, hey, why aren't I able to cast a 16th ounce or sometimes even an 1/8 ounce lure like easily? Big thing is the rod. The taper of the rod is a big thing. Also the type of line that you're using, I'll go into that a little bit and how that plays in with the rod. But overall, most people are either using fluorocarbon or they're using a braided line. I don't really use monofilament at all, but it does have its places. It's actually not too bad with BFS either, especially with those short range stuff. But this rod, this is my stream rod right here, what I use for like little creeks and stuff like that when I'm fishing for brook trout. I don't use this much in open water because I have a Phoenix Mirage, which is almost as capable, but it's longer and you get a little bit better cast and stuff out of it. But all that this is an ice fishing rod. This is a 4-foot. It's called a whipper rod. I don't know if you can see that. This is 4-foot. It says extra fast tip, which it is. This is this different color here. I think it's a solid glass tip. It's an inexpensive rod. I think they go for about 25 bucks. But that tip is pretty fast. You can see it's a distinct tip, but it just opens up into more rod. It has a pretty beefy backbone through here. I mean, it definitely doesn't want to move out of the way here. It's a pretty good stream rod. It is set up for using an inline reel or a spinning reel, but that first guide there, it's not too bad for casting. I have no problems. Your line will rub on this rod because if you're using it upside down, and that bends, but it's not like there's a bunch of stress on it or anything like that. But this is a really fun rod. I think rod 25 bucks. You slap a like that T3 setup that was in my last video, or any other custom Frankenstein configuration you come up with, and you're pretty good in business casting. I'd say I'd easily an 1/8 ounce, but you can get a little bit under an 1/8 ounce too. You probably even squeeze out a 1/16 of an ounce using the bearings and stuff like that with an inexpensive reel. This setup you can get even below that with this rod if you're using, let's say, that Aldebaran or that SS Air that was in that reel video. But I had a lot of fun with this rod. Like I said, it's nice for walking through the brush, and also I can get it low enough where if I'm standing somewhere, I can just do like a little flick cast. I can get that lure out there, all using one hand. And this other hand can be tied behind my back. Although with the spinning reel, you'd have to pop it open and kind of have your line like this and flop it out there, and you get those bigger coils that could get caught up on brush and stuff like that. This rod's really fun to use, but open water, I prefer to use this rod. And I have a different video covering this rod. It's with, I think it's 6 out of 9 of my setup videos. It's the one with the Aldebaran and the Mirage. So this is that Phoenix Mirage blank. This is the 6'1" 2-piece. This is a very fun rod, and it took me a while to pick it up, but when I finally got it in the mail, I got the 2-piece because it's cheaper, and I thought I'd be using it more in the brush and stuff like that. Not the case. I take this to a little bit more open areas, but then when I'm busting through brush and stuff like that, I'll use that ice fishing rod, that whipper rod. So I got the 2-piece for that. Part of me wishes I had the 1-piece, or it has more parabolic action. But it's kind of nice because I got a little bit of backbone in here. But this rod will zing out lures. I can cast down to a 32nd ounce with that Aldebaran. I don't want to say no problem, but easily, I just have to be conscious of the wind and stuff like that. But yeah, this rod, I've caught a lot of nice sized pike on this rod, 30 plus inches. Handles it just fine. A lot of bluegill. You can boat flip them. This is a really tough rod. It almost acts like a fiberglass rod, but it's lightweight and it's still made out of carbon, so it's sensitive too. I've only used this. I've never used this with fluorocarbon. I've only used it with braided lines, so I can't say 100% how sensitive it is, but it's, I mean, you can tell it's nice. More information will be posted below in the setup link. Then up a step from that, this is the St. Croix SS Air combo that I have. I'll list that link down below as well. I'll briefly touch on this. This is kind of your traditional lighter side BFS without getting to, like, you know, ultralight stuff. I can use this, cast worms, Ned rigs, kind of that, the low range, I'd say a little bit over 1/16 ounce, up to a 1/4 ounce, maybe a little bit more with this rod. I'll do it. And this rod, I mean, it's plenty sensitive. It does have a nice light tip on here, and then it goes into a pretty decently solid backbone. I mean, it'll still open up, given a little bit of pressure. But I use this with 7-pound fluorocarbon, and I mean, it's got a lot of muscle. I can still steer fish away, and it's also it's soft enough that I could use the smaller crankbaits for bluegill and stuff like that. Seeing I am running that fluorocarbon, it gives me a little bit more stretch. That's why I can get away with running crankbaits on the Mirage, because it has such a deep bend to it that I'm not ripping those hooks out. And I'd say in the most traditional sense, this is actually my very first BFS rod. I'm in the process of recreating. This is built on a MHX. It's a spin jig rod. I don't remember the exact model number. I'll post that blank below. It's a spin jig rod, rated down to a 32nd ounce. I would, even if this was built into a spinning rod, I don't think it would do that. It's just a little bit too much rod, but it's a very fun rod. I caught a lot of nice sized pike with this, unintentionally or sometimes intentionally. It's a little bit too much for bluegill, I think. If you're running fluorocarbon or monofilament, you can get away with it, I think, but it's just a little bit too much rod for that. This can be used for, you know, most of your, got a lot of bass on it, walleye, some smaller pike, but definitely small bass, you know, on up. You could do crappie and stuff with this, but it's just a little bit too much rod for that. And the taper, as you can see, this is rated as an ultralight blank too. I mean, it's extra fast. You can see it wants to hit backbone, but it opens up more when you got line on there. So it's a pretty versatile blank if you're using it overall. You can throw some small crankbaits with it, with fluorocarbon line, and it got a deep enough bend for that. You can get all the way up to throwing weightless worms, wacky rigs, all that kind of stuff on here, and that's basically what I'm going to be using it for. But come springtime, this all had pink thread wrappings on here. It has red right now. I did paint the nut on here. This is actually a Frankenstein rod, by the way, too. This is originally a 6-foot blank. Had it built as such, and then what I did was I thought I can get more out of it by making it longer, and I had this Tatula handle around. So I actually I sanded the blank down a little bit, sanded the inside of this, and I just kept shoving it in there, shoving in there, shoving in there, and now it's, I don't know, it's super balanced. The blank comes down to about where the trigger is right here. There's about that much blank in there. But it's lightweight. It's, I don't know, it works for me. This was a cheap build too. This blank's only, I think the blank's less, it's like 45 bucks, and then, you know, you throw some guides on there and stuff like that, it works out. But that's how the rod is very, very overlooked. If you're casting and you think it's not working out, there's something wrong. A lot of times your rod doesn't have a deep enough bend. You want a little bit deeper bend in your rod to be able to cast those lighter lures, because you want the rod to do the work. If you're trying to whip it out there, just go, you know, it's going to be too much on those light spools, and it's just going to want to backlash. So gentle casting motion, and if your rod's not loading up that way, you're probably using it something too light. So as you can see, 3 of my 4 BFS rods are custom. That way, it's the only way you're going to be able to do it in the US. So going to a place like mudhole.com, that's where you can get a lot of good ideas. They don't have them as kits, anything like that. Just click on the spinning rod section and just go from there. Kind of see what your weight range is going to be. And make sure that your lure rating, well, the lures that you're using is in the middle of that rod's rating. So let's say this blank right here is rated down to a 16th, and you're trying to throw 16th ounce lures, make sure you drop down to that 1/32. Also, make sure with that spin jig blank, like the one that I talked about earlier about being from mud hole. This one I got kind of hosed on, but it actually helped me out a lot because it gave me the backbone of stuff I needed to horse a lot of fish. It wasn't as light or limber as I thought it was going to be, but it worked out pretty good. But just make sure that the lures you're using fall in the middle of that rod's category. It doesn't have to be smack dab in the middle, but you don't want to use a rod to one end or the other. If anything, if you can slightly overload a BFS rod, it works out a little bit better for me because that means the rod's loading up a little bit more. But I don't suggest doing that way over. Let's say if it's rated to an 1/8, you might be able to get a 1/4 ounce out of it. Kind of depends. Like this Mirage rod, it's almost like a glass rod. This thing can launch out like a 1/4 ounce. It's kind of weird. You just barely flick your wrist and that rod just bends all the way down and just launches the lure out there. So don't forget to subscribe, comment below. I'll be going over the lures, kind of all the ancillary stuff. I kind of hit the hardware already. So make sure you subscribe so you can see those when they come up on your feed. Also like and post your comments below. I'll answer your questions as much as I can, suggest some builds.